September 4th, 1944. A humid afternoon rested over the American POW camp as a truck carrying newly captured German women prisoners rolled through the gates. Exhausted, dusty, and mentally prepared for the worst, the women braced themselves for cruelty, hunger, and humiliation. Everything they had been taught, in Germany every rumor, every warning told them the Americans were brutal, unforgiving, even barbaric. None of them expected comfort. None of them expected kindness. And certainly none of them expected what they were about to discover. As they stood in formation, an American sergeant signaled for them to follow him to the mess hall for orientation. The women walked hesitantly, whispering to one another, still unsure of what fate awaited them. Some held their breath, expecting interrogation rooms or punishment cells. But the moment the door of the mess hall opened, cool air, the coldest they had felt in months, brushed across their faces. For a second, it felt unreal. Many of them hadn't felt cold air since before the war. Inside the mess hall, the atmosphere was completely different than what they imagined. The place was bright, clean, and filled with the scent of baked bread. Some of the women exchanged confused looks. "Why does it smell like a bakery?" one whispered. Another replied, "This can't be for us, can it?" But the real shock came when the sergeant pointed toward a large metal freezer against the wall. He opened it, casually, as if it meant nothing, and misty cold air spilled out. The women gasped, stepping back instinctively. Their eyes widened as they saw rows upon rows of gallon tubs stacked neatly, and chocolate, strawberry, even mint. An entire freezer full of ice cream. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence was so heavy that even the American guard paused, confused at their reaction. Finally, one woman exclaimed under her breath, "Ice cream. For us. Impossible." Another shook her head. Not even our generals had this during the war. She wasn't exaggerating. In Germany, ice cream was a luxury that had disappeared entirely as the war worsened. Ingredients were gone. Shops were closed. Cold storage barely existed, and civilians, especially women, had not tasted anything sweet in years. For them, ice cream wasn't food. It was a memory. The sergeant motioned for them to step closer. Slowly, cautiously, they approached. One woman covered her mouth with her hand, whispering in disbelief, "This could feed a whole village." Another woman, clearly overwhelmed, said, "If my children saw this, they would think they were dreaming." The guards, noticing their shock, tried to lighten the moment. One jokingly said, "Don't worry, it's not poisoned," which actually startled one prisoner. But another cracked a shy smile for the first time since capture. The ice was melting, not just in the freezer, but between two sides who had been taught to hate each other. As bowls were handed out, the German women hesitated, unsure if this was a test, but the Americans simply nodded, encouraging them. Finally, the first spoon dipped into the cold dessert. The woman's eyes widened instantly. The sweetness hit her like a forgotten memory from childhood. Another woman cried silently, overwhelmed by the simple taste of something joyful after years of fear and rationing. Soon, the entire group sat at the long tables, eating quietly, but with visible relief. Some laughed softly, others stared at their bowls with disbelief. Few simply let the cold melt on their tongues, savoring something they thought they would never taste again. One American guard later said he had never seen prisoners react like that. They didn't just enjoy the ice cream. They looked like people who had been given a piece of humanity back. And in a strange way, that freezer became a symbol proof that even in war, kindness could exist in the most unexpected places. Later that night, one woman wrote in her tiny notebook, "Today, the enemy gave us ice cream. The world is more complicated than we were told." That freezer full of ice cream became the first thing the women talked about during their stay, a memory they carried for the rest of their lives. For them, it wasn't about the dessert. It was about hope, about realizing that the people they feared most were capable of compassion. And in a world torn apart by hatred, that discovery was more shocking than anything else they saw in the 2 days had passed since the German women first discovered the ice cream freezer. Yet the shock had not worn off. Many of them still spoke about it, in whispers, half amazed, half confused, because nothing in their wartime experience had prepared them for such treatment. But what surprised them even more was how that single moment slowly began changing their perception of everything around them. On the morning of the 6th, the women were taken on an orientation walk around the camp. Most expected to see harsh conditions, overcrowded barracks, screaming officers, or punishment yards. Instead, they found well-kept areas, gardens, planted by previous prisoners, a small library, and even a recreation field. Every new discovery added another crack in the wall of fear they had built around themselves. One woman, Elise, whispered, "It feels like a place for people, not prisoners." Another replied, "This is impossible. Either the Americans are pretending, or the world is not what we thought." Their confusion deepened when they reached the camp's kitchen storage area. A different American guard, older and more opened another freezer. This one smaller, filled with meat and vegetables. The cold fog spilled out again, and the women instinctively stepped back. After years of rationing, seeing so much food kept at perfect temperature felt unreal. In Germany, civilians no longer had proper refrigeration. Many relied on salt or cellars. Electricity shortages made freezers a distant luxury. The guard noticed their amazement and simply said, "Here, we store food so it won't spoil." The German women looked at each other, stunned. One of them, Greta, finally said softly, "In Germany, only the military headquarters had machines like this. Even then, not as large." The Americans didn't understand why the women were reacting so strongly, but the prisoners' shock was genuine. They had grown up in an era where cold storage was rare, expensive, almost mythical. Seeing it used so casually for prisoners bordered on unbelievable. Later, during their midday break, the women sat at the outdoor benches, discussing what they had seen. Some still couldn't accept it. "There must be a trick," one insisted. "They show us the good parts first, then punish us later." Another woman shook her head. "But why show us ice cream first? Why feed us well?" A third added, "If they wanted to break us, they would use fear. This is something else." In the afternoon, the American staff offered them another treat: fresh fruit. Apples, oranges, and bananas were placed in baskets, and the women were encouraged to take one each. Some did so immediately, while others hesitated. Bananas, in particular, shocked them. They had become almost extinct in Germany by 1939. Seeing one now felt like seeing a relic from a forgotten world. Helga, who hadn't seen a banana since childhood, held it up and said, "We thought only officers could get these." The guard simply replied, "Here, everyone gets the same." The fairness startled them the most. In Germany, class rank and power determined everything: the food you ate, the clothes you wore, even the medical care you received. But here, in the American camp, things looked strangely equal. That night, one of the youngest women, barely 19, cried in her bunk. When asked why, she said, "We lived our whole lives thinking the world hated us. But these people, our enemy, they treat us better than we treated our own workers." Her words rippled through the barrack like a quiet shockwave. It wasn't loyalty that broke just assumptions. The ice cream moment had opened the first door. These new experiences kept widening it. The next morning brought another surprise. The camp offered optional work rotations: kitchen duty, library sorting, laundry assistance. But they were not forced. They could refuse without punishment. One German woman asked an American officer, "Why would prisoners be given choices?" He responded simply, "Because you are still human." Those words hit harder than anything else. Human. It had been years since many of them felt like that. When lunchtime came, the women walked into the mess hall, and once again, the light hit the metal freezer, gleaming like a symbol. The Americans didn't open it this time. Yet several women found themselves staring at it anyway, almost as if it represented the strange kindness of this place. One guard noticed and laughed gently. "Don't worry, ladies, it's still full." His friendly tone startled them more than the freezer itself. They weren't used to enemy soldiers speaking kindly. During the meal, two women started discussing what the ice cream meant to them. One said, "It wasn't about the dessert. It was about being treated like we matter." Another agreed. "It reminded us that life doesn't have to be fear and hunger." By evening, The tension inside the camp had noticeably softened. The German women no longer walked stiffly or avoided eye contact with guards. They spoke more freely. Some even asked questions. For the first time since their capture, they slept without expecting violence. In the final moments before life, one woman whispered to her bunkmate, "I wish my mother could see this. She would never believe that the Americans gave us ice cream." Her bunkmate replied, "Maybe someday the truth will reach home." For now, their discovery remained personals, something quietly powerful in a war full of brutality. A reminder that even in the darkest chapters of history, humanity sometimes appeared in the most unexpected forms, like a freezer full of ice cream in a prisoner of war camp.